Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Russia's arrest of an Azerbaijani ex-special forces soldier on terrorism charges is raising alarms across the South Caucasus. The dramatic case comes amid already strained ties between Moscow and Baku, with each side trading accusations of violence and interference. Tonight we ask, is this just another flare-up or evidence that Russia's influence in the region is slipping away? Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Russian agents recently seized a former Azerbaijani special forces operator who they suspect was plotting terrorist attacks involving explosives on Russian cities on Ukraine's behalf. This incident has raised eyebrows, as it is yet another blemish on relations between Russia and Azerbaijan. A few years ago, Russia's influence over the South Caucasus seemed impossible to overcome, despite other regional powers vying for control. Moscow had walked a tightrope between Azerbaijan and Armenia in particular. In the wake of the conquest of Nagorno-Karabakh by the former and Russia's inaction, Armenia started to slip away from under Russia's shadow, but that didn't mean that Azerbaijan was interested in lingering in it either. Last year's crash of an Azerbaijani Airlines passenger plane, the blame for which Baku has laid at Moscow's feet, has proven to be a thorn in Russo-Azerbaijani relations. While the leaders are still on talking terms, the statements made by them are nothing like the ones that appear from other Russian partners.
I would like to note that we are very satisfied with the level of interaction between our countries.
A potential peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia is being brokered by the United States for now. Should it be achieved, Russia's position and influence in the region would suffer an incredible loss. This time Ilham Aliyev had far warmer words to share, unlike after his talks with Vladimir Putin.
It's a day which will be remembered by the people of Azerbaijan with a feeling of pride and gratitude to President Trump.
Azerbaijan itself, much like other former Soviet republics, is eager to diversify its partnership portfolio. It has been carrying out a diplomatic offensive not just with Western countries and traditional allies like Turkey, but also with partners far, far further east.
And now let's zone in on the east-planning portion of our show. Russia's influence in the South Caucasus has waned in the wake of its invasion of Ukraine. Azerbaijan itself has been distancing itself from the conflict, but that doesn't mean it hasn't made more subtle gesture towards either side.
Azerbaijan is a country that is well known for its export of energy, oil and gas. Ukraine, as a major gas hub in Europe, is often seen as a gateway towards the rest of the continent in this regard. It is therefore unsurprising that Azerbaijan has been interested in maintaining stable relations with Kyiv, even if doing so could draw Russia's ire. At a meeting in Davos in 2025, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev met with Volodymyr Zelensky to discuss humanitarian ties and energy cooperation. Both leaders reportedly showed interest in boosting collaboration in the area of energy. Soon after the meeting, Aliyev signed a decree allocating $1 million from the Presidential Reserve Fund to the Ministry of Energy for humanitarian aid to Ukraine. This is not the first such delivery of aid, as Azerbaijan has been supporting Ukraine with energy throughout the war. This aid has exceeded $40 million. Baku has not been supporting Ukraine militarily and maintains an official stance of neutrality on the conflict.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Tensions between Russia and Azerbaijan are once again in the spotlight following an arrest by Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB. On Monday, Russian officials announced they had detained an Azerbaijani citizen, reportedly a former member of Azerbaijan's special forces, accused of plotting terrorist attack in southern Russia. The FSB released video footage showing agents arresting the man and later interrogating him. Now, in the recording, he admits to preparing an explosive device and claims to have sworn allegiance to a Ukrainian nationalist battalion. But his confession, delivered in highly formal language, appeared scripted. Independent verification of Moscow's claim is impossible, raising questions about whether the man spoke under duress. This case lands in the middle of a worsening diplomatic standoff between Moscow and Baku. Earlier this summer, 2 Azerbaijani men died during mass arrests in Russia, deaths that Azerbaijan described as torture and murder. In retaliation, Baku cancelled Russian cultural events, raided the Kremlin-backed Sputnik news agency, and detained Russian nationals. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has also turned sharply critical of Moscow, calling his country's Soviet-era entry into the USSR a Russian invasion and occupation. He has openly accused Russia of ignoring attacks on Azerbaijani civilians and even hinted at supplying Ukraine with weapons after Russian strikes damaged Azerbaijani-owned oil depots in Odessa. Now, taken together, these events point to a deeper question. Is Russia losing its grip on the South Caucasus? Moscow still wields force, but its influence appeared to be slipping. Azerbaijan, long seen as a cautious partner, is now speaking more boldly and aligning its rhetoric with Ukraine and the West. The fallout from the latest arrest may mark not just a legal case, but another sign of Russia's fading power in the region. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is George Melashvili, a president of Europe-Georgia Institute. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation.
So recently we saw another arrest of an Azerbaijani citizen by Russia. And of course, the first incident already caused some diplomatic rift between the countries. And my question would be, are these separate dots on the canvas, or at this point, are there some lines to be drawn between them?
Of course, it's a very big joint picture. So what we have been seeing in the recent few months developing between Moscow and Baku is a rapid deterioration of relations, which began when Russian air defense system took down an Azerbaijani flight. It was December 25, 2024. And then we had this escalation, rhetorical escalation between Azerbaijan and Russia, which was followed by the events in Yekaterinburg when Russian police, OMON, detained Azerbaijani citizens and then allegedly tortured those people. All of it is a part of previously existing Russian strategy of intimidation. For example, in Georgia, we remember very well when in 2006, Russia expelled all ethnically Georgians in their attempt to punish then Georgian government. So Russia has always been trying to, in a way, reiterate and retaliate to the citizens of their neighboring countries the moment political relations between the leaderships in Moscow and, for example, Baku are going in a wrong direction. We've seen it in relation with Moldova, we've seen it in relation with Georgia, we've seen it with Armenia. What we're seeing now, it's the same scenario, the same strategy and tactics utilized by Kremlin to intimidate Baku, but this time against Azerbaijan. So that's the only difference which is happening. Other than this, all of it has previously been seen, not once, not twice. But what is interesting is a geopolitical shift of Azerbaijan trying to distance itself from Russia.
So this brings us to the question whether this intimidation tactic was kind of initiated because of the Azerbaijan's perceived geopolitical shift, or do you think that the war in Ukraine and the desperation to garner more ally or solidify its kind of grip on the Caucasus has led to this rift in the relations?
I think it's both in a way, because these 2 points are interconnected. On one hand, what we see now is Azerbaijan, which is implementing entirely sovereign foreign policy. They do not ask a permission from Kremlin anymore. They believe that they have enough military capacity to defend themselves in a case of any conflict. Also, they believe that they have a very strong, reliable military ally, Republic of Turkey, which is also supporting to their perception and image of self-sovereignty, which they have been doing for a very long time. On the other hand, Azerbaijan has solved its long-lasted, let's call it a problem, in case of Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. So there is no more direct military threat to Azerbaijan from Armenia, vice versa. Pashinyan is doing very actively, and he's very much trying to normalize, stabilize relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and also Armenia and Turkey. So from this perspective, definitely Russian influence in the Caucasus is waning. We definitely see that Pashinyan is trying to detach himself from Russia as much as he can. We're seeing that Baku is doing the same. And the only region, the only country in the Caucasus where Russian influence is unfortunately stable so far is Georgia. So from this perspective, what we are witnessing is a detachment of 2 South Caucasian countries that usually enjoyed closer relations with Russia, and now one of them is trying to get closer to Europe, Armenia, and the second one is trying to detach itself from Russia as much as possible. So I would say it is both.
And do you think there's a world where Russia might tone down the rhetoric or perhaps choose the carrot over the stick to try to bring Azerbaijan back? Or do you think this is going to escalate into more tensions and eventually some sort of hybrid warfare or a more kind of a political takeover sort of situation?
Russia has always been utilizing hybrid warfare tactics in the South Caucasus, not only in Azerbaijan, but also in Georgia and also extremely right now in Armenia. However, when it comes to Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan has resources to counter these tactics, and they are pretty good at utilizing same or identical methods themselves. The reason why, for example, Russian cultural houses were closed in Azerbaijan, and now Azerbaijan is moving closer to closing Russian language schools, is exactly because they want to mitigate the possible hybrid threats that can be coming from Russia. When it comes to a carrot, it's more difficult because it requires a step back from Putin, which we know he hates to do. So if there will be a political decision from Russian Federation, then it is possible. But considering how situation is unfolding and also considering the attempt of Russian Federation to demonstrate strength and force right now, I don't think they will be able to take a step back without a big problem in their own propaganda rhetoric. So Russia might try to utilize this tactic, but I don't think it is likely in the nearest future. Maybe in long term they will try to use carrots as well, but not now.
And so it does seem like Azerbaijan will still need some powerful allies when it comes to guarantee its own prosperity. So do you think, much like Armenia, it will start looking either towards Europe, United States, China, or other countries to fill that void while Russia is no longer a reliable partner?
Azerbaijan's Western pivot is slightly unlikely at this point of time. Their relations with the West have always been mostly transactional. However, they will enjoy support if it is offered and if the cost is not considered too high for the regime in Azerbaijan itself. On the other hand, in case of Armenia, it is absolutely obvious that they are trying to move closer to the West. And also, when it comes to Azerbaijan, we should not forget that they already have a very powerful ally, Turkey. And Turkey has excessive military capacity. They are able to provide military support if necessary, and there is a military agreement similar to NATO Article 5 between Azerbaijan and Turkey. So Azerbaijan already has a very strong and powerful ally. Again, they might try to deepen ties with the West, but the question is, what price will they have to pay for it?
All right, and also what can they offer to the West as well? And well, I'm also being quite curious looking from the outside what that means for the West, for Ukraine, and for the broader geopolitical implication for Russia to having lost another one of these quite important ally for the country.
Well, when it comes to offerings, Azerbaijan has significant resources when it comes to natural gas and when it comes to other natural resources. Second, Azerbaijan is a gateway to Central Asia, just like the Caucasus in general. So it has very big geopolitical importance when it comes to the European Union and to Europe in general. Also, Azerbaijan is probably the most important parts of the so-called Middle Corridor, which is supposed to connect China and Europe. And from all these perspectives, it is a very significant geopolitical player with quite significant resources and also significant military capacity. So for the West, Azerbaijan can be a very significant, important, and good ally when it comes to specific foreign policy goals. However, again, we should not be too idealistic. Azerbaijan's foreign policy is immensely transactional, and also the regime in Baku is not a liberal democracy. They will always be trying to keep themselves in power, and from this perspective, of course, it adds some risks to the possible partnerships between the West and Azerbaijan.
So do you think it would be for the West or Europe's interest to pry Azerbaijan from Russia as a reliable ally? Or do you think that the fundamental difference between the political system and, like you mentioned, their views towards democracy will become something that will be hard to navigate?
Well, first of all, it has to be understood that relations with Azerbaijan will be always transactional. for the West and for Europe. When it comes to more strategic allies, Azerbaijan can be a significant actor that will contribute to the peace and stability in the South Caucasus in a long-term perspective. However, if it comes to integration or European enlargement, in that case, Georgia and Armenia are offering much more potential, obviously. But again, for Europe, Azerbaijan can play a significant role as a partner when it comes to transactional diplomatic decisions and transactional foreign policy.
All right, thank you so much for your input and insight. I really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Russia has killed at least 24 people and injured 19 in a recent strike on the frontline town of Yorova. The attack took place while local residents were queuing up to receive pensions.
The attack on Yorova is yet another example of Russia ramping up its attacks against Ukraine in recent weeks, despite Western efforts to achieve peace. Both pensioners and postal service employees delivering the pensions were among the casualties. Ukrainian authorities have called the attack, quote, pure terrorism, which has nothing to do with military operations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that the Russian forces were well aware of what they were targeting in this attack, and that this was a strike directed at civilians. He also called on G20 nations in Europe to respond to the strike. Several European officials have already denounced the attack, with the Estonian foreign minister calling it a shocking display of inhumanity, and the European Council President Antonio Costa asking whether this was what Russia meant when it talked about peace.
Moldovan President Maia Sandu has accused Russia of waging hybrid warfare against her country. Moldova is heading to parliamentary elections in late September, and many observers are concerned over Russian interference.
Maia Sandu has warned European lawmakers and officials that Russia has been waging a large-scale interference campaign ahead of the upcoming vote. The goal of this campaign, according to her, is to pull Moldova closer to Russia's sphere of influence, use it against Ukraine's cause, and turn the country into a launchpad for further hybrid attacks against the European Union. Sandu and her allies and partners have long accused Russia of trying to influence results of various elections in Moldova. The Moldovan president has focused her policies and platform on moving the country closer to the European Union, with full integration and membership being the end goal. European leaders have been receptive to Moldovan efforts, as the German, French and Polish leaders recently visited the country in a display of solidarity ahead of the September 28th vote.
Moscow has launched a process of withdrawing from the European Convention for the Prevention of Torture. This step raises the risk of Russia submitting its prisoners, including Ukrainian POWs, to even more inhumane treatment.
Since the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, Russia has violated more than 400 international agreements. Among these are some very notable ones, such as the Geneva Convention. By withdrawing from the European Convention for the Prevention of Torture, Putin would relieve Russia of an obligation to admit international inspectors to its prisoners. It would also prevent international authorities from receiving complaints from Russian inmates. In its explanation for the decision, the Kremlin has said that it has had no representative in the European Anti-Torture Committee since 2023, after the Council of Europe blocked the election of a new Russian member. The Council of Europe expelled Russia from the organization shortly after it invaded Ukraine, but despite this, Russia is still formally obliged to comply with any rulings of the European Court of Human Rights released before the expulsion. The Kremlin has openly said that it will ignore these rulings.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.